Madam President.
The senator from Vermont.
Madam President, let me thank Senator Lee and Senator Chris Murphy for their outstanding and consistent leadership on this issue. You know, at a time when the country bemoans the fact that there is not a lot of bipartisanship, this effort indicates that people with very different political philosophies can come together on an issue of enormous magnitude. And I do want to thank Mike Lee for his great work on this. Madam President, I rise today to speak in support of overriding the President's veto of Senate Resolution number 7. On April 16th, despite telling us that he is opposed to quote-unquote endless wars, President Trump used the second veto of his presidency to reject Senate Joint Resolution number 7, which directs the removal of U.S. armed forces from the Saudi-led intervention in the Republic of Yemen, a war which began 4 years ago. Madam President, the vote on that resolution that was passed here in the Senate was 54 to 46, all Democrats voting for it and 7 Republicans voting for it. Resolution passed the House on April 4th by a bipartisan vote of 247 to 175. Madam President, the current situation in Yemen is the worst humanitarian disaster on earth. In March of 2015, under the leadership of Mohammed bin Salman, then Saudi Arabia's defense minister and now the Crown Prince, a Saudi-led intervention in Yemen's ongoing civil war took place. According to the United Nations, Yemen is at risk of the most severe famine in more than 100 years. According to the UN, Yemen is at risk of the most severe famine in more than 100 years, with some 14 million people. This is a small country, some small, poor country. Some 14 million people now face starvation as a result of this war, Saudi-led intervention that we are supporting. According to Save the Children organization, Madam President, some 85,000 children have already starved to death, and millions more face death if the war continues. And it gets much worse than that. A new United Nations Commission report just published by the University of Denver states that the impact of this war on civilians, particularly children, is actually far more serious than previously thought. If this war continues, the report estimates that by the end of 2019, it will have taken the lives of some 219,000 people in Yemen, including 140,000 children under the age of 5. According to this report, every 12 minutes, a Yemeni child is dying as a result of this war. The magnitude of the suffering in that country is literally unimaginable. We're talking about the possibility of millions of people starving to death, of hundreds of thousands of people dying by the end of this year. And the fact is that the United States, with relatively little media attention, has been Saudi Arabia's partner in this horrific war. We have been providing the bombs the Saudi coalition is using. We have been refueling their planes before they drop those bombs, and we have been assisting with intelligence. In many, many cases, our weapons are being used to kill women and children. Late last year, I met with several brave Yemeni human rights activists. They had come to urge Congress to put a stop to this war, and they told me clearly that when Yemenis see "Made in the USA" on the bombs that are killing them, it tells them that the USA is responsible for this war. And that is a sad and tragic truth. Mr. President, the bottom line is that the United States should not be supporting a catastrophic war led by a despotic regime with a dangerous and irresponsible foreign policy. So issue number one, Mr. President, is the horrific tragedy that we are contributing to in Yemen. Issue number two is equally important, and that is that the United States' involvement in this war is clearly unconstitutional. Now, I hear many of my Republican friends claim that they are strict constitutionalists. Well, if you are a strict constitutionalist, voting to override Trump's veto should be a no-brainer, because this war has not been authorized by Congress, is unconstitutional. Let me remind my colleagues who may have forgotten what is in the United States Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 states clearly, and I quote, "Congress shall have power to declare war," end of quote. While the President has the authority over the conduct of war once it has been declared, the Founding Fathers gave the power to authorize military conflicts to Congress, the branch most accountable to the people. Mr. President, under the War Powers Act of 1973, the assignment of a member of the United States Armed Forces to, quote, "command, coordinate, participate in the movement of or accompany," end quote, another country's military during a war constitutes the introduction of the United States into a conflict. Our military involvement in the war in Yemen, which has included logistical and intelligence support, as well as aerial refueling of Saudi warplanes, clearly meets this definition. Mr. President, for far too long, the United States Congress, under both Democratic and Republican administrations, has abdicated its constitutional role with regard to the authorization of war. The historic passage of this resolution, the first time since the 1973 War Powers Resolution was passed that it has been successfully used to withdraw the United States from an unauthorized war, was a long overdue step by Congress to reassert its constitutional authority. Finally, after years of abdicating that responsibility, Congress stood up in the Senate and in the House and said, you know what, Mr. President, you do not have the power to get U.S. troops involved in a war that we did not vote upon. And that is a big deal. Congress is finally doing what the Constitution of the United States mandate that it does. And now, within a half hour or so, the United States Senate must act to protect that constitutional responsibility by overriding the President's veto. Now, I respect that there are members of this body who voted against the initial resolution and that you support U.S. intervention in Yemen for one of a number of reasons, and I respect your point of view. But if you think the United States should be involved in the Saudi-led war in Yemen, bring that resolution to the floor of the Senate. Let's have that debate. You explain to the American people why we should be spending significant amounts of money and put American military lives in danger, and why you think it's a good idea. Come to the floor. That's what the Constitution says you should do, and let us vote that issue up or down. Maybe you win, maybe you don't win. I think you don't win, but maybe you will. But let's have that debate. But what is absolutely clear is that is the responsibility of the Senate and the House, and the President alone cannot decide when he wants to send American troops into conflict. Last point that I want to make, Mr. President, is that this vote this afternoon must make clear to Saudi Arabia that we will not continue to follow their lead into disastrous military interventions. Let us be very clear. Saudi Arabia is a despotic dictatorship that works overtime to prevent any movement in that country toward democracy. That is a country run by an incredibly wealthy family. Mohammed bin Salman, I think, has the distinction of both owning the largest yacht in the world and the largest house in the world. They have endless wealth, and now they are using their wealth and power in a dangerous and irresponsible military intervention. Saudi Arabia is a nation that treats women not as second-class citizens, but as third-class citizens. It is a nation that 7 months ago murdered a journalist in cold blood in its own consulate in Turkey and then dismembered his body. That was a signal to any dissident in Saudi Arabia that if you dare speak out against the royal family, that's what you have to look forward to. Getting killed in cold blood, getting your body dismembered. Dozens of people were recently executed in Saudi Arabia because of their opposition to government policy. So the word has got to get out to the dictatorship in Saudi Arabia that no, we will not be following their leads and their interventions in wars that are only causing horrific pain in that region. In my view, what we should be doing in Yemen now is ending the bombing, supporting a diplomatic solution to the civil war there that finally brings peace to that region, provide immediate humanitarian aid, and helping the people, along with the international community, to rebuild their shattered economy, which is dysfunctional today. Mr. President, this is an important vote. It's an important vote that says that the people of Yemen need humanitarian aid, not more bombs. It is a vote which says that the United States Senate believes in the Constitution of this country, which says that it is Congress, not the President, that determines whether and when we go to war. And it is a vote which tells Saudi Arabia that we will not follow their lead in irresponsible interventions. So, Mr. President, I would hope very much that the members of this body summon up their courage and vote to override Trump's veto. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.